It's about history, policy, and impact. A new perspective on current affairs, bringing experience, insight, civility, and scholarship to the urgent issues of today. It's about our past, present, and future. Your host, Pulitzer Prize-winning author and journalist, Douglas Blackman. From the University of Virginia's Miller Center, this is American Forum.
Welcome back. I'm Doug Blackman. Our guest in this episode of American Forum is Bernie Sanders, United States Senator from Vermont, a former U.S. Congressman, former city mayor, self-proclaimed Democratic Socialist, and since April 2015, a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I should warn you, Senator Sanders, that a couple of days ago, I tweeted out a request for suggestions of what I should ask you in the course of this interview. And over the past 2 days, that ended up being a conversation that involved about 200,000 people as of this morning.
It's going to be a very long interview.
I was going to say. That's why this stack is as big as it is. But this is the stack here, yes, and this is only the good ones. So I'm glad you've agreed to be here for many hours. Through these suggestions that came in, it's very obvious that you've captured the enthusiasm, the imagination of a very substantial group of people who are very concerned about the issues that you talk a lot about and you clearly are concerned about. But there's also a good bit of confusion, I think, still about who you are and what you stand for, and really particularly in terms of what you would do if you became president of the United States, and also what it means that you call yourself a socialist or a democratic socialist. But so what really is the difference between a very liberal Democrat and a democratic socialist?
Okay. I think as a nation, it's important for us to understand that there are countries around the world that are doing some really interesting things and have done them historically. For example, I think many Americans don't know that we are the only major country on earth, Doug, that doesn't guarantee health care to all people. So there was a great debate over the Affordable Care Act. I supported it. We still have 35 million Americans with no health insurance. We pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. I live 100 miles away from Canada. Healthcare is a right of all people, not controversial. UK, France, Germany, Scandinavia. I believe that government has got to represent all of the people, and not, as is increasingly the case in the United States, the billionaire class in corporate America. And I think that healthcare, for example, is a right of all people. Another example, you go to Germany today, you will find that college in Germany, universities, are free. And in fact, American students are going to Germany and getting a free education. True in Scandinavia, it's true in other countries around the world.
What's the likelihood that the agenda you're talking about now would be something that
well,
you
Doug,
could move
that's a
forward?
great question. And in many ways, that is a question that I have been talking about from day one in this campaign. And this is what I say. What I say is that no president of the United States, not Bernie Sanders, not anybody else, not the best president you can think of, can in fact address the enormous problems facing this country. And that is the collapse of the American middle class, income and wealth inequality, the fact that we're behind many other countries in terms of healthcare and education. No president can address that without a political revolution. Now, what you say is, well, here is what you were implying. This is the reality that we face when we come in. We have got to change that reality. Virtually everything that I talk about is supported in very strong numbers by the American people. Why aren't we implementing that? Why aren't we listening to the American people? The American people want to raise the minimum wage. The American people want to rebuild our infrastructure and create millions of jobs. The American people want the rich and large corporations to pay more in taxes. Not just Bernie Sanders. That is what the American people want. Why doesn't it happen? Well, it happens that when you go on the floor of the United States Senate, the Republican agenda is exactly the opposite. They want to give more tax breaks to billionaires. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut Medicare. They want to cut Medicaid. Exactly the opposite of what the American people want. Why is that? Well, that takes us to a campaign finance system, which is a total disgrace and which is allowing big money interests to purchase the United States government. So when I talk about my agenda, I do not say, hey, vote for me and I'm going to implement all of this on day one. I never say that. What I say is that we need tens of millions of people to become involved in the political process in a way That has not happened before. That is what this campaign is about. It's not just electing Bernie Sanders. It's creating what I call a political revolution.
The American people oftentimes are very much in concert around certain things in broad terms, like gun control, but then a lot of American people end up unwilling to move forward in certain ways when you get down to the hard tax and the specifics. The same applies at times to things like minimum wage. When I said...
Well, let me disagree with you. Not the case. The American people want to raise the minimum wage. It's our Republican colleagues in Congress who refuse to do that, and in fact, in many instances, want to do away with the concept of the minimum wage and lower the minimum wage. So I don't agree with you. I think what we have seen actually in the last few years, and it's interesting you raised that question, is as a result of fast food workers and other low-wage workers going out on the streets, and I've been with them in some of these fights, going on strike, rallying the American people, we have come an enormous way in raising consciousness, and you have cities like Seattle, Los Angeles, you have New York State moving forward to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is my view.
At the same time, there are business owners, and not just the Republican Party, who say, wait a minute, this may cause us some real problems. And there are some real concerns about that are not completely invalid. And in fact, among those 200,000 folks who I was in conversation with earlier was my 14-year-old daughter, much to my pleasure.
She runs a business. This is incredible. A very precocious kid.
She is very precocious. And so I'm going to exert my host discretion and ask a question that came from her on this very topic. Her name's Colette Blackman. She told me to ask you, raising the minimum wage to $15 will help many workers come out of poverty, but what about small business owners who can't afford to pay their workers this much and the employees who are subsequently laid off?
Okay, and that's a good question. The answer is, and why I prefer to do a national minimum wage rather than see states and cities just do it, is if we do it nationally, then everybody is in the same boat. I'm not here to tell you that there will not be cases where people, small businesses, may be negatively impacted. But I think the positive greatly outweighs the negative, because what we have seen over many, many years is the minimum wage has not kept up with inflation, okay? And it is much lower today than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Second point, I believe that the way we create jobs in this country and stimulate the economy is putting money into the hands of working people, millions of whom today have no disposable income whatsoever. So if you raise, somebody is now making $8 or $9 an hour, and over a period of years, by the way, Doug, we're not talking about doing this overnight. It will be a gradual increase over a period of years. That worker will now have more money. That worker will be able to go out and buy goods and services. And when he or she does that and spends that money, they then create jobs for other people. So I think if we are serious about trying to move our economy forward and see economic growth, one of the important ways is to put money into the hands of people who do not have it, and people who make $7.25 or $8 an hour do not have it.
Again, I want to come back to trying to establish, with just a little clarity, what the boundaries of your economic perspective are. Because when we use the word socialist in any kind of way, that invokes a lot of things for a lot of people. Some of the more successful socialist governments in the past in other countries were also ones that nationalized institutions like banks and such. And I know you're not espousing that, but if we went back to 2008, 2009, the financial crisis, would you have reacted in a more interventionist way
Well, let me tell you what I would have done, because I was in the Senate, and I will never forget Ben Bernanke and the Secretary of the Treasury walking into the Democratic caucus. They went to the Republican caucus as well, and basically saying that if you guys do not come up with a huge amount of money, something like $700 billion, we think the American financial system will collapse, and that may take down the entire world's economy. Other than that, not a serious problem. Now, my response was twofold. First of all, and I would ask your viewers to go to YouTube and check it out. When I was in the House, I was a member of the House, what was then called the House Banking Committee, now the Financial Services Committee. Check out the discussion I had with Alan Greenspan about his desire to deregulate Wall Street, to allow investor banks to merge with commercial banks, to merge with insurance companies, to do away with Glass-Steagall. Here are the questions that I asked him. What I believed at that time, if you do that, it would be a disaster. It turned out to be right. So you're looking at a guy who did everything that he could to prevent the deregulation of Wall Street, because I don't trust Wall Street. Frankly, don't tell anybody, but it is my view that the business model of Wall Street is basically fraud. And I think that what we have seen over the years is time after time, with minimal regulations, banks being caught cheating and doing illegal things. So I happen to have fought against the deregulation. Right now in this country, I think I am right, I'm not wrong by much if I'm not, is we have the 6th largest financial institutions, Doug, today, have assets of about $11 trillion. That is about 60% of the GDP of the United States of America. They issue about 2/3 of the credit cards and about 35% of the mortgages. What I would have said then, and what I say now, is when you have financial institutions that are so large, and by the way, everybody should know this, 3 out of the 4 largest financial institutions in this country today are significantly larger than they were when we bailed them out because they were too big to fail. So what do I think? I think, number one, you bring back Glass-Steagall and you start re-regulating them. But more importantly, if Teddy Roosevelt were alive today, a good Republican, what he would say, break them up. That's my view. If a bank is too big to fail, it's too big to exist. That was my position, and that is my position today.
I don't mean to challenge your depiction of Wall Street as a kind of racketeering.
That's a good definition. That's not bad.
All right. I thought I was summarizing it. But among the many questions that came in, this is one version of one that came in from many people, from someone named Warren Strong, at WG Strong, if anybody wants to reach out to him. Ask him if innovations like Twitter would exist in a socialist economy when taking risks goes unrewarded.
Well, first of all, again, when I talk about a democratic socialist society, I am looking at governments in Europe over the last many, many decades. Some of them had labor governments, some of them have social democratic governments, some of them have social governments. Countries like Denmark and Sweden and Finland and Norway and other countries who, in my view, have done pretty good things in terms of having childhood poverty rates a fraction of what they are in the United States. Now, if you go to a country like Sweden, you go to a country like Denmark, these are very innovative countries. Now, they are very small countries. They're homogeneous countries. It's wrong to economically compare them to a complicated large country like the United States of America. But of course, this is what I want to see. I do want to see entrepreneurial activity. I do want to see innovation. I do want to see the creation of wealth. But I do not want to see a situation where the top 1/10 of 1% in our country owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. I do not want to see a situation where today 58% of all new income is going to the top 1%.
I don't want to spend much of our time asking you about your opponents because we're really interested in you. But there are two things I will ask you that relate to Hillary Clinton. One is, this is a question that my daughter did not suggest, but that I ask on her behalf in some respects after having listened to her. And that is that as interesting as you are to her and these ideas that you are presenting, she and millions of other women and young women and girls have also been inspired by the idea that a woman of such accomplishment as Hillary Clinton, who certainly is as qualified to be president as anyone could possibly be, what a triumph it would be for our society for someone like that to be elected president of the United States. So what would you say to my daughter to explain why it is worth it to forego that triumph in her mind and make you president of the United States?
Well, I think your daughter makes a very good point. And I understand there are millions of people, not just women, men as well, who want to see us break down the discriminatory barriers that have been placed in front of women for so many years. But I think when we look at where we are as a country, I think it's important to take a hard look at what the candidates are talking about and how they will respond to the crises that we face. And I think if you compare Hillary Clinton, and I've known Hillary Clinton for 25 years, I consider her a friend, and you're quite right. She has a remarkable record of public achievement. But I think if you look at Hillary Clinton's views on the issues, which is what this campaign is about, I think the views that I am fighting for, the positions that I'm fighting for, will do more to address the very serious crises facing the middle class and working family. So Hillary Clinton and I have some strong disagreements. I mentioned a moment ago, I want to see the minimum wage raised over a period of years to $15 an hour. She has not been clear on that. I am very concerned, and have been for many years, about our trade policies, which I believe have been a disaster. That's NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, this TPP that we're debating right now. I have opposed these agreements because I think they have resulted in the loss of millions of jobs as factories shut down here and go to China and other low-wage countries. Hillary Clinton has, as I understand it, had no position on the TPP. I believe that climate change is one of the great planetary crises that we face. I sit on both the Energy and Environmental Committee, and I can tell you, I've talked to scientists from all over the world. Climate change is real. It is already causing devastating problems. It is of human origin. We have a window of opportunity to have to deal with this and deal with it aggressively, or else this planet that we're leaving to our kids and grandchildren is going to be in very difficult shape. I am opposed to the construction of the Keystone Pipeline. Hillary Clinton has not voiced an opinion on that. I believe we should expand Social Security benefits, not cut them. Hillary Clinton doesn't have a position on that. So I think it is fair to say that we like each other, we respect each other, we have different opinions on some of the major issues facing our country.
For you to win the Democratic nomination, you must have, almost certainly, at least to some degree, some kind of meaningful support from African Americans, because they are so central to the Democratic coalition. Over the course of your campaign, one of the things that came a little bit out of the blue for me was that some of your events have been disrupted by people associated with the Black Lives Matter movement, and some have been critical of you. What is that all about?
Well, what it's about is that folks in the Black Lives movement have been raising an enormously important issue. And they used some events where I was a guest at. One was dealing with immigration reform at Netroots conference, and another one where I was invited to speak on Social Security as an opportunity to get attention for their issues. That's what it's about. The issues that they're raising is that they are sick and tired of seeing unarmed African Americans killed by police officers when in police custody. They are sick and tired of institutional racism. They are sick and tired of the fact that the United States has more people in jail than any other country on earth, disproportionately Black and Hispanic, that we have a criminal justice system which is clearly broken. I share those views. And we have been talking about ways to prevent young people from ending up in jail. And let me just, if I may, because this is a really important and sensitive issue to me. I asked some economists to do a study for me a month ago. What they concluded on youth unemployment, people don't fully appreciate this. African American youth unemployment and underemployment for high school graduates is 51%. Can you imagine that? And then we are shocked to find that so many of our young people end up in jail. 69% of African American male high school dropouts end up in jail. That is a national disgrace. And in my view, what we have got to be doing is investing in education and in jobs rather than jails and incarceration. And I am going to do as much as I can, if elected president, to make sure that happens. There's a whole generation of young people that society has turned its back on, and we have got to address that.
One of your most prominent African American supporters, and who became more visible, I think, somewhat in the aftermath of some of the Black Lives Matter incidents, is Cornel West. This goes back to what are the boundaries of your ideology. We've been talking about where does liberal democratism stop and where does your economic thinking begin. That's on one side of the equation, but Cornel West, I believe, is somewhere further to the left, and he's someone who is very supportive of the Revolutionary Workers' Party. He's been on stage with Bob Avakian. I mean, essentially, that's the current Communist Party of America, and he's someone who advocates revolution. He uses the word revolution. What do you say to all that?
What I say to that is not my view, and what I say to that is that Cornel West is one of the important intellectuals and writers in our country today. And what I say is that when you work with people And this is true for Hillary Clinton or true for any Republican candidate. It doesn't mean that you end up agreeing with everything that person says or does. I am the candidate, and I am running on a platform. And I'm glad that Cornel West is supporting me, and I'm glad that many, many other people are supporting me. But I do not necessarily subscribe, obviously, to everything that anybody who supports me has said or done in their lifetimes.
Well, as you know, we're taping this show in an institution that's devoted to the study of the presidency in many respects, and what has made for successful presidencies and what has made for ones that faltered. A colleague here some years ago, as part of these oral histories that we conduct with almost every member of every administration, there was an interview done with President Carter some years ago, where he was talking about, particularly in the first year of his presidency, the difficulty that was caused by the fact that, as he said, he also was not part of the Democratic establishment. He was coming from the outside. You are suggesting the possibility that a Congress that has refused to work with the current president because it claims he's a socialist radical, and he's not a socialist radical by any empirical measure, and you're suggesting that you can work with them, and in fact, you actually are a socialist.
No, not quite. What I mean by fighting for a political revolution is to change the dynamics of American politics in a very fundamental way. In the last election, when the Republicans did very, very well, 80% of young people did not vote. 63% of the American people did not vote. So let me tell you point blank, nothing changes in America unless that dynamic changes very, very significantly. But I'm not sitting here and telling you that I can negotiate better than Barack Obama with them. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that millions of people will be actively involved in the process.
But you haven't, in fact, had the kind of foreign policy experience that perhaps one would hope an incoming president might have had.
You're right. I am not the former Secretary of State of the United States of America. We won't name who is.
There's several.
Right. But when looking at the information available to Senator Clinton and looking at the information available to Congressman Sanders, I voted against the war in Iraq. And if you check out what I said at that time, much of what I feared that would happen in the Middle East in terms of the destabilization of that region turned out to be, sadly enough, true. All right. So to say that I don't have experience, well, I'm not the former Secretary of State, but I think my judgment has been pretty good.
When President Obama came into office, he had campaigned on some very clear ideas about complete withdrawal from Iraq and things which almost as soon as he came into office proved to be extremely difficult to pull off. And then he discovered that there was issue after issue, that this wasn't one issue, there were all these things, Libya and ISIS as it rose up. In the end, he compromised dramatically on the things that he had said, I think because he believed that otherwise he wouldn't have gotten a second term. The question I would ask you is, had you been president of the United States at that moment, would you have stuck to your campaign promise?
Look, we are living in an incredibly dangerous world. All of us see things on television, beheadings, children sold into sexual slavery, barbarity, and these are horrible, horrible things. The United States is the most powerful nation on earth. We have the largest military, and we have got to work in coalition with other countries around the world to do everything that we can to resolve these issues. And I believe that everything being equal, the Iraqi people in that region have got to stand up to ISIS. I mean, what they are fighting for in many ways is for the soul of Islam. They have got to do it. I do not believe that American troops there in perpetuity are going to ever win this kind of thing, nor do I believe that that is what the American people want. At the end of the day, the Muslim nations themselves are going to have to combat ISIS with our support. That's my view.
Despite all the excitement you've generated, it's still the case that something like 70% of Democratic voters, of your most likely voters, are not going your way. And you're counting on a real social revolution involving those people.
In America today, you probably still have 30–40% of the American people who do not know who Bernie Sanders is or what I stand for. So I believe we have the energy, I believe we have the momentum, I believe that we are gaining more and more support. And I believe that we have a good chance to win this thing, which, by the way, would be one of the great political upsets in the history of the United States politics.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, good luck and safe travels. If you'd like to join the conversation with American Forum and our guests, send us a message on Twitter or Facebook. For transcripts, podcasts, and video of this and other episodes, visit us at millercenter.org, American Forum. I'm Doug Blackman. See you next week.